I'm violating several of my own principles by sharing this account on an online forum under a pseudonym. Throughout my extensive and, dare I say, respected career as an independent investigative reporter, I've never done anything like this. Nor have I ever gone public with a story without thoroughly verifying my facts. Truthfully, I rely almost entirely on a single source for most of the accounts I'm about to share. One individual labeled a rebel and a madman by the establishment. The same authorities who were so desperate to keep him quiet. I'll admit I was skeptical when I first heard the elderly sailor's outrageous stories. I've never been inclined toward belief in the supernatural and have always rooted my convictions in cold empirical evidence. But recent developments have forced me to reconsider, and my source has become someone I now trust deeply. Still, I regret not having more time to delve deeper into these claims and secure undeniable proof. Unfortunately, I fear my window is closing fast. The powers that be may well be on my trail. They certainly have motive to keep me silent. Yet, during my time, I've stood up to countless petty officials, covert agents, and would-be autocrats. I no longer fear governments, but what dwells in the vast, unfathomable ocean. That terrifies me. You're likely aware of thalassophobia, that profound and unshakable dread of deep water. This was never something that troubled me much. Previously, I would have chalked such fear up to evolutionary instincts or overexposure to terrifying aquatic thrillers. Never would I have imagined that our seas concealed so many sinister truths and horrors nearly beyond comprehension. Some believe ignorance is bliss, but I've never lived by that mantra. I've always taken pride in my hunger for understanding and my relentless pursuit of truth. It's what drew me to journalism in the first place. But now, knowing what I do and feeling the paralyzing fear that has infiltrated my very being, I wonder if any of it was worth it. I can't unlearn what I've come to know. I can't shake the malevolent force that clutches at me with freezing fingers. And so, I feel an obligation to recount this tale, even if it's the last thing I ever do. What can I say about Jack Brady, my brave informant and a maritime legend who put everything on the line to reveal the truth? Jack was well into his 70s when we first met. A man with decades of experience under his belt, yet still burning with unyielding resolve and rebellion, evident even behind his weathered eyes and aged face. It's incredible to think it's been only a month since Jack first emailed me requesting a private meeting. He suggested he had something urgent to share, something meant solely for me. Apparently, he'd come across a few of my previous investigative pieces and decided I was the right person to tell his story. I'll admit, I nearly discarded his unexpected email without a second thought. I'm no stranger to prank messages and eccentric ramblings in my line of work, and Jack's cryptic hints about the ocean's hidden truths honestly seemed like pure nonsense. Yet, I didn't delete it. Instead, I replied and set up a meeting. I'm not sure why, call it instinct, but something in his message sparked my curiosity. I sensed there might be something worth chasing. That said, I didn't walk in unprepared. As is my habit, I did some background digging on Jack before agreeing to meet. It wasn't long before I learned he'd led quite an eventful life and had dabbled in a range of professions, though the sea remained his enduring passion. Hailing from a devout Irish Catholic family in Boston, Jack had enlisted in the Navy at 18 and served for 5 years. After receiving an honorable discharge, he spent several seasons working as a diver in the Caribbean, until some unnamed event abruptly pushed him to change course. The specifics of his work history became hazy from then on, at least from the official accounts. He was listed as a contractor with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for close to 40 years, though notably never as a direct employee. What Jack Brady actually did for this unassuming government organization remained a mystery, but his message strongly hinted that Noe was entangled in something far more sinister. But what exactly were they hiding? His original message offered no solid answers, instead pointing to obscure references and unrelated sources. I sifted through countless articles, scientific reports, and even Wikipedia entries about mythical sea beasts, the legend of Atlantis, and strange underwater phenomena. Only one thread seemed to connect it all: Jack Brady's lifelong obsession, the world's oceans. We finally met in a dim, rough-around-the-edges tavern in the Docks District, the kind of establishment where every customer eyes you with suspicion the moment you walk in. I spotted Jack at the bar, sipping slowly from a hefty tumbler of whiskey. He looked just as I had imagined, a towering figure, not overweight, but powerfully built. A faded scar cut across his right cheek, and his intense blue eyes remained sharp despite the drink. Jack greeted me with measured calm, gave a firm handshake, and a brief nod. He offered to buy me a drink, which I declined, and led me to a secluded booth in the corner, insisting we speak in private. Oddly, Jack wouldn't let me record our talk, but I didn't want to risk forgetting anything, so I secretly brought along a pocket recorder. I kicked things off by asking him about his early life and beginnings in the workforce, mostly to get a read on the old man. His replies were brief and matter-of-fact. He'd been raised in a family with deep roots in seafaring and learned how to handle a boat when he was just a kid. Jack didn't go into much detail about his Navy days, only saying he'd served as a deckhand on a destroyer and was stationed in the South China Sea during the chaotic fall of Saigon. It was obvious he didn't want to delve into his private or family affairs, but he was eager to share a tale from his time as a rescue diver in the Bahamas, July 13th, 1982. That date is seared into my memory. I know it sounds like a cliché, but that was the day everything changed. That morning, I got a call from the Nassau police asking for assistance in retrieving a body found offshore. A local fisherman claimed he'd spotted a corpse standing upright in shallow water. Standing upright? I cut in, baffled. Yeah, his feet were encased in cement. Classic mob-style hit. Sleeping with the fishes, you follow? I gave him a skeptical look. That's pretty bizarre, isn't it? Not really, Jack answered with a casual shrug before sipping his whiskey again. Back then, we were smack in the middle of the most active drug trafficking corridor in the entire Western Hemisphere. Narcos didn't settle scores with words, and victims often ended up dumped at sea. Recovering dead bodies wasn't out of the ordinary, but this case felt different the moment I went underwater. What do you mean? I pressed, now fully engaged. Well, it was a scorcher that day. Temps were climbing into the high 90s. The ocean should have felt like bath water, but as soon as I dove in, it felt freezing. I actually trembled the second I hit the surface. It didn't add up, and things only got more bizarre from there. He stopped for a moment and took a deeper swig from his glass. I figured Jack needed a bit of liquid courage to go on, and I could see the blood had drained from his face. The body wasn't far below, maybe 20 to 30 meters. We weren't far out from land, and the sea was unbelievably clear, so I could make out the shape of the corpse from above. Even with all the red flags, I still dove. Like I said, the water was unnaturally cold. But there was more. The ocean around the site was eerily empty. No fish, not a single one. I've seen plenty of underwater recoveries, and any time a body's submerged for a while, it becomes a buffet for marine scavengers. Scavengers usually show up first, and once blood's in the water, the larger hunters follow. That's just how nature works. Before long, all that remains is bone and sinew. But during this dive, there wasn't a single creature in sight. The direction of the tail confused me, yet I couldn't help but lean in. I noticed Jack's tone drop, his voice barely above a whisper, hesitant to continue sharing. I gave him a nudge. "Keep going," I said softly. He looked away, eyes fixed on the liquid swirling in his glass before he finally went on. As I mentioned, I went under and got a close look at the body. I already explained how his feet were sealed in concrete. I've got no idea who did that or why, but I suppose they had their motives. The corpse belonged to a man, roughly 6 feet tall. That's about all I could determine. His clothing was shredded, and his skin had begun to decay. No signs that sea creatures had fed on him, but even so, his body was deteriorating. The level of decay suggested he'd been submerged for a long time. Yet that didn't make sense. The sighting had only been called in earlier that morning. He wasn't in deep waters, and the clarity of the ocean made him visible from above. So it seemed impossible that no one noticed him sooner. I couldn't wrap my head around the body's state, but my priority was figuring out how to haul him up. I realized I'd need special gear and started prepping to rise back and return to the boat. That's when I noticed it, and my entire body went cold. "What did you see?" I pressed him. Jack drained the last of his drink, his hand trembling slightly. The man's eyes had been shut. Then, out of nowhere, they snapped open and locked onto mine. I swear those eyes, they weren't human. Deep black, empty, horrifying. I froze, too stunned to believe what I was witnessing. And then came the worst part. The dead man's mouth began to open, revealing a massive, pitch-dark void. It didn't even look real, more like a passage to some kind of nightmare realm. Water trickled in as if he were trying to yell, but no sound could escape underwater. Though his legs were anchored, the thing stretched its skeletal hands toward me, fingers curled like claws. Thankfully, I was just out of reach, but I lost my balance and tumbled to the sea floor. The thing kept shrieking, silently, furiously, trying to grab me, its obsidian eyes blazing with rage. What could I do? I bolted. I swam hard, straight up, leaving that demonic thing stuck down below. When I got back, I gave my report to the Nassau police. The detective assigned gave me a look like I'd lost my mind. For a while, even I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my grip on reality? I did begin to question my own mind, but things changed when the police sent down another diver, and apparently his experience mirrored mine. In fact, I think he ended up hurt, his suit and skin torn by the creature's claws. After that, the whole ordeal intensified. The local police were baffled, unsure how to handle the entity, so they brought in a specialist from the U.S. I can't say for sure what went down after that, but I believe the American authorities retrieved the being and took it back with them. Why they did it, I can't explain. And honestly, I'd rather not know. That was where Jack wrapped up his initial story. I'll admit, my first instinct was to laugh out loud, but I caught myself after noticing the tension in Jack's posture. It was obvious he wasn't just trying to pull one over on me or waste my time. His tale was outrageous, bordering on the absurd, yet he clearly believed it had all happened. I figured he must have hallucinated the entire scene with the undead figure beneath the sea. Maybe there was something poisonous in the water, or perhaps Jack was dealing with some lingering trauma from his time in the military. Regardless, I didn't buy into his story. I found myself completely speechless, unable to respond to what felt like utter madness. Ultimately, Jack shattered the silence himself, almost like he could read my thoughts. "You don't believe me, do you? You think I'm full of crap?" His eyes locked with mine as he posed that heavy question, and I suddenly felt uneasy. "Sorry, Jack, but it just doesn't hold up. I'm a serious journalist, and chasing phantoms and demons isn't part of the job." Jack gave a knowing grin and nodded, never breaking eye contact. "That's all right. I didn't expect you to buy it. Not right away." He went on, saying he didn't have solid proof for that story, but he did have plenty more experiences to share, ones with real evidence. He said he was willing to talk more, but he understood that it required a bit of trust. If I wanted to walk away, he'd understand. No pressure, no judgment. But if I chose to keep going, I had his number. With that, he excused himself for another drink. I left the bar not long after, my thoughts racing from the surreal conversation. I've encountered some wild situations during my reporting years, but Jack's account stood apart. Normally, I'd dismiss paranormal claims instantly. Still, something about Jack Brady left a mark. He didn't come across as your typical dreamer or lunatic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a genuine story buried beneath it all. I did conduct my own investigation into the Bahamas incident, but unearthed little that supported Jack's narrative. My efforts to get in touch with the Nassau police led nowhere, although Jack had insisted that the whole episode had been swept under the rug by the authorities. I did uncover a brief article in an old newspaper archive that confirmed a body had indeed been discovered at the mentioned location on that exact date. What struck me was the complete absence of any follow-up reports, which one would naturally expect if an active investigation was underway. With my background in this area, the situation definitely reeked of a deliberate cover-up and press blackout. This is likely what compelled me to reconnect with Jack and arrange another conversation. I still doubted that he'd truly come face to face with an undead entity off the Bahamian coast, but I was beginning to believe he might hold knowledge about a hidden world of secrets and conspiracies. Our next meeting happened on a bright afternoon at the marina. As we strolled along the pier, gazing out over the waves, Jack eagerly pointed out his sailboat, a meticulously kept 25-foot vessel named the Nautilus, the name beautifully painted on its hull. "She's a gem," I remarked with admiration, noting the pride that lit up Jack's face. "Will you take her out today?" I asked. Instantly, Jack's expression darkened, and I sensed I had touched a nerve. There was a heavy pause before he replied, and I noticed a profound sorrow in his tone. "No, I haven't sailed since I retired. Doubt I ever will again. I probably should let her go, but I just can't bring myself to do it." I wasn't sure what to say in response, so I simply made a mental note of his words. Regardless of whether Jack's stories were factual or delusional, one thing was certain. He was dealing with deep emotional wounds. We made our way back down the dock and found a bench beneath the sunny sky. It was there that Jack opened up about his change in career following the Bahamas ordeal. The Nassau post was a solid assignment. Sure, I witnessed some grim scenes, but I also helped people and made a difference. And the place itself was stunning, a real slice of paradise. If it weren't for what happened, I might have stayed there for good. But seeing something like that alters a person. It's as if a veil was lifted and I could suddenly see behind the curtain. I also became curious about the specialists they brought in to handle the thing I saw. The fact that an entire team had been dispatched from my homeland hinted this wasn't an isolated case, and that our own authorities were aware of what really lurked beneath the surface. And, as it turned out, my instincts were spot on. I began digging for answers through my contacts in the military. Looking back, it was probably reckless to go digging into secretive corners and obscure branches of the government. But luckily, I didn't end up cuffed and dragged off to some hidden detention center. In fact, what happened next was the total opposite. I got a phone call offering me employment. I arched a brow, but couldn't deny the thrill that surged through me at this development. Was this the conspiracy I'd been chasing all along? The man on the line introduced himself as Mr. Smith. And no, I'm not joking. That really was his name. Andrew Smith worked under the NOAA, which sounds like a pretty boring bureaucratic gig at first glance. But Andrew ran a department that wasn't listed on any public record. To this day, the federal government refuses to acknowledge that the unit even exists. Smith's division was known as the Oceanic Special Investigation Unit. Harmless sounding, sure, but the work they do is far from ordinary. So this guy just offered you a job? Yes. He'd gotten wind of my inquiries and decided to dig into my background. Apparently, he liked what he saw and thought I'd be a valuable addition. He was the very same expert deployed to handle the creature I'd encountered in the Bahamas. His squad managed to subdue and secure the entity before turning it over to military custody. What happened after that is anyone's guess. For all I know, the thing is still confined somewhere in Area 51. But my instincts had been right all along. There's a vast amount of strange activity and mysterious occurrences taking place beneath the sea. And OSIU is the organization charged with getting to the bottom of them. Jack then spent a few minutes outlining the internal workings and mission of the unit, giving me a look into his early career with the agency. He started off as a rookie investigator, but thanks to Smith's guidance, he moved up the ladder quickly. Over time, he was sent across the globe to respond to unusual reports and strange sightings in the oceans across the world. Jack admitted that the majority of these incidents turned out to be either deliberate fabrications, cultural legends, or things with rational causes. Sometimes the unit would go ages without coming across anything truly anomalous, and politicians would repeatedly try to shut them down. But then something real would emerge, and suddenly they'd be back on the radar. The account he shared with me that bright day at the harbor was brief but deeply eerie. He spoke of an entity referred to simply as the swimmer. Initially, it seemed like another sea myth, and we were quick to dismiss it. Yet tales of the swimmer go back centuries, even as far as the Roman Empire. What's fascinating, however, is that this very tale is echoed in different cultures and civilizations worldwide. The accounts are strikingly similar in all instances. Sailors speak of a singular swimmer, a man with bronze-hued skin, occasionally unclothed, at other times dressed in various forms, including clothing or even swimwear. Yet, he's always spotted far from land, sometimes hundreds of miles away from the nearest shore, in water so remote that no ordinary person could possibly swim that distance. When seen, there are never any other vessels nearby, and there's no clear explanation as to how he ended up stranded in the open ocean. Curious, isn't it? But it gets even stranger. Numerous ship captains have attempted to rescue this man, but every effort to call to him or physically pull him from the sea has been in vain. This man, or whatever he is, seems completely unaware and simply continues swimming. "That's incredible," I murmured, speechless for a moment. The story was undeniably odd and unsettling, but it still sounded like just another folklore tale. However, Jack had more to share. "I took on the case in the winter of 1988, Jack began, after reports surfaced of the swimmer being sighted in the Atlantic around 200 miles east of Bermuda. Mr. Smith didn't think much of these reports, but he still sent me to look into it. I hopped a ride on a Navy frigate which was on patrol, and they let us use their reconnaissance helicopter to search for the entity. To be honest, finding him was mostly luck, since we only had a vague location. But we did manage to find him, and this time I got solid evidence." Jack paused and pulled out his phone, showing me a video. The footage was grainy and poor in quality, clearly shot on an 80s-era camcorder before being converted to digital. The clip appeared to have been filmed from a helicopter hovering above the open water, and I could hear the roar of the rotor blades in the background. The helicopter was flying through bad weather, with the ocean below appearing choppy, waves rising and crashing violently. Without warning, the cameraman zoomed in, and that's when I saw him. The solitary swimmer was face down in the water, wearing bright red shorts. I couldn't make out his face, but his actions were remarkable. I watched in awe as he swam against the crashing waves, showing no signs of panic, somehow staying afloat. He didn't even glance up when the helicopter passed over, nor did he respond to the loudspeaker's calls. He simply kept swimming, undeterred, even as the waves loomed over him. The camera stayed focused on him for a few moments before pulling back. The cameraman then scanned the horizon, revealing that there was no land or other vessels or aircraft anywhere in sight. All I could see was an endless expanse of ocean in every direction. Then the footage cut off abruptly. I looked up from the screen, meeting Jack's gaze as he stared at me intently. "Wow," I said quietly. I repeated the words, but didn't go into much detail. The footage was compelling, but I couldn't say for certain if it was fabricated. "Did you ever figure out who he was?" I asked. "No," Jack replied, shaking his head. "It's still an unresolved case, but I have my own theories." "Oh?" I prompted, intrigued. Jack paused as though deep in thought, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Have you ever heard of the legend of the Wandering Jew?" he asked. "It's an ancient tale about a man who mocked Jesus while he was on the cross and was cursed to roam the earth until the second coming." The name sounded familiar, and I nodded. "Well, I think the swimmer might be some kind of nautical version of that legend," Jack continued. "He was once a man, but he committed a terrible sin. Now he's doomed to swim the world's oceans forever. He doesn't tire, he can't sink, and he can never stop. No one can help him, and all we can do is leave him to his fate." I felt a cold shiver creep down my spine after hearing Jack's theory. I wasn't particularly religious and hadn't stepped foot in a church in years, but the thought of a lost soul, trapped, cursed, and wandering the oceans for eternity was deeply unsettling. Our meeting came to a close soon after that, with Jack telling me to reach out if I wanted to learn more. Once again, I dove into my research after our encounter. There are countless references and stories about the swimmer or swimming man throughout history, spanning various cultures, which confirms its existence to some degree. However, I couldn't find the video that Jack had shown me anywhere online. I didn't think the video had been altered. It's possible it had been staged. The swimmer might have been dropped from a helicopter and picked up after the footage was recorded. But why take such a risk with such terrible weather? Regardless, by this point, I was intrigued, and I didn't waste any time in arranging another meeting with Jack. For our third interview, Jack invited me to his place, which I saw as a positive sign, believing it meant I had earned his trust. He lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment not far from the harbor. The space was neat and well-maintained, though quite simple. I noticed a number of liquor bottles on the kitchen counter. Jack offered me a cup of coffee, which I accepted. We sat in his cozy living room, and I noticed the well-worn books on his shelves. As expected, Jack had many books on sailing and maritime history, but I also spotted titles covering a wide range of topics, including religion, philosophy, and mythology. What really caught my eye, however, was a pristine copy of the Bible sitting on the coffee table. Jack hadn't struck me as particularly religious, but perhaps things he had experienced had shifted his perspective. As for me, I was still skeptical, though undeniably curious, not yet convinced by Jack's far-fetched stories. I watched as Jack set up his TV to stream a video from his phone, and I was quietly impressed by his tech savviness for someone his age. He didn't show me the video immediately, but first offered an explanation. "I'm sorry, but I can't share this file with you," he said. "The same goes for the swimmer footage. I'm not supposed to have these videos, and I definitely can't show them to journalists." He paused for a moment. "I'm breaking several federal laws just by talking to you. You can call me reckless if you want, but I'd prefer not to spend the rest of my life in prison. If I die, though, that's a different story." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I'm willing to leave all the evidence to you, but only if you're willing to expose the truth." I hesitated, unsure how to respond, but I eventually answered, "Okay." Then Jack leaned in even closer and asked, "So, my friend, I'm sure you've heard of the lost city of Atlantis." At that moment, I couldn't help but laugh at how absurd his question sounded. "Don't tell me you guys actually found it," I remarked with amusement. "Afraid not," Jack replied with a chuckle. "That would have been the crowning achievement of my career, right? No, we didn't find Atlantis, but we did uncover and explore another fabled city hidden beneath the waves, an ancient metropolis whose very existence shatters our understanding of human history. With that mysterious statement, he pressed play on his phone, and the footage flickered onto the TV screen. What unfolded was footage captured by an underwater camera, seemingly mounted on a small submarine. It was a remotely operated underwater vehicle, ROV, and the footage was recorded in 1996, with technology that was cutting edge for its time. The video showed the sub gliding through the murky waters, clearly far beneath the surface. The only source of light came from the powerful lamps affixed to the submarine. As the sub sank deeper, it neared a vast collection of stone structures scattered across the ocean floor. The scene was staggering. I could make out several smaller, flat-roofed buildings surrounding a group of 3 towering pyramid-like structures. It was clear this was the ruins of a submerged city, long deserted by humans and overtaken by sea creatures and deep-sea predators. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the incredible footage. I'd never seen anything like it. The question popped out of my mouth before I could stop it. Where exactly was this footage taken? The Mascarene Plateau, northeast of Madagascar and west of the Seychelles, Jack answered. About 150 meters below sea level. I couldn't believe it. My eyes widened as I watched the submersible draw closer to the largest of the pyramid-like structures, perhaps 50 to 60 feet tall, its stairways ascending toward the summit. I wasn't an expert in ancient history, but I'd never heard of a lost city in this part of the world. No, you wouldn't have, Jack said, anticipating my thoughts. There are no historical records of this civilization. In fact, every geological and historical account tells us that a city like this shouldn't exist. But here it is, I said, still stunned. What did you learn about this place, and why has this discovery remained so secret? Well, the truth is, we don't know much. Archaeologists are baffled by the structures and the pyramids. They've noted that the design of the buildings incorporates elements from several ancient cultures, Egyptian, Mayan, Cambodian. It seems this sunken city predates them all. Jack paused for a moment, eyes fixed on the screen. It could be tens of thousands of years old, yet the structures are remarkably well preserved. I was speechless, still absorbing everything he was saying. So why hasn't this been made public? Jack hesitated, then pointed toward the screen. The reasons will become clear soon enough. The ROV descended further, entering a small opening that led inside the submerged pyramid. The remote-controlled submersible moved slowly through a narrow passageway inside the pyramid, its headlights cutting through the dark as it delved deeper into the heart of the structure. What truly caught my attention, however, were the mosaic-like images covering the walls of the corridor. These pictures seemed to depict the harrowing and brutal history of this lost civilization. I saw robed priests standing atop the pyramids, rain pouring down in torrents as they wielded knives and daggers to slay chained prisoners, the blood of their victims spilling down toward the water's edge. In the next image, sailboats appeared on the water, with seamen tossing the bodies of slaves or captives into the dark depths below. But the most unsettling image was of a massive sea predator beneath the surface, feasting on the floating human corpses. The creature was enormous, resembling a sea serpent with green scales. its body coiled and undulating beneath the water. It had 3 heads, and the sight of it was nothing short of terrifying. Each head had glowing red eyes, and the mouths were filled with razor-sharp teeth, ready to devour anything in its path. Jack must have noticed my shock, for he surprised me by quoting a verse from the Bible. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Upon earth there is none like him, who is made without fear. He beholds all that are high. He is king over all the children of pride. He is Leviathan, and this is his kingdom. I was left speechless, staring at Jack in disbelief. He didn't explain further, instead gesturing for me to keep watching. Eventually, the submersible emerged from the long passage and entered an enormous chamber deep within the pyramid. My heart stopped when the camera zoomed in to reveal the horrors inside. The chamber was filled with the remains of countless humans, possibly hundreds or even thousands. The walls were adorned with skulls, their hollow eye sockets staring down accusingly at the small submersible that had intruded upon their forgotten tomb. I turned away from the screen in revulsion and glanced at Jack, who switched off the video before meeting my gaze. There are tales of a lost continent called Lemuria, said to be located in what's now the Indian Ocean. Once dismissed as mere legend, we've now uncovered proof that it existed. This city, which has no name, appears to have been the capital of that long-lost civilization. Jack continued, his voice serious. As you can see, their leaders and priests performed human sacrifices on a massive scale. But despite the horrors they inflicted, it seems these rituals served a deeper purpose. I raised an eyebrow in disbelief and shot him a sharp look. Jack, sensing my skepticism, lifted his head defensively. Look, I'm not trying to excuse what they did, but the Lemurians were at the mercy of the creature, the beast. Leviathan, yeah. He paused for a moment before continuing. Our anthropologists have studied the paintings they left behind. The Lemurians believed that offering sacrifices to the creature from the depths was necessary. They thought it was the only way to protect their civilization from being destroyed. It seemed that this system worked for a while, but in the end, the beast triumphed, and their city was swallowed by the ocean. That's impossible, I exclaimed, finally losing my patience. There's no creature like that in the world's oceans. It just can't exist. Jack, however, looked at me with a knowing smile, nodding as though he expected my reaction. There was a time when I would have agreed with you, he said, but as you know, less than 20% of the ocean has been explored. We have no idea what might be down there. I threw my hands up in frustration. Okay, I get it, I replied defensively, but I still don't believe in a monster like that. A 3-headed serpent? Come on, man, where's the evidence? Jack's blue eyes sparkled with intensity as he leaned forward. Well, I just so happen to have another story for you, but I ask that you reserve your judgment until you've heard everything I've got to say. I shook my head in disbelief. It felt like I was being pulled deeper into something bizarre, and I wasn't sure I liked it. Still, Jack had my attention now, and I couldn't walk away without hearing the full story. There was an unusual incident in the early 2000s, Jack continued. It was widely reported at the time, in fact. The news broke before we had a chance to bury it, but of course, the public didn't hear the full version of the story. I raised an eyebrow, my skepticism flaring. Of course, I replied, falling back into my cynical mindset, questioning everything. If Jack noticed my tone, he didn't let it show. Instead, he continued with his story. In November 2003, a research team tagged a 9-foot female great white shark off the coast of southwestern Australia. 4 months later, the record showed the shark had suddenly plunged 2,000 feet and experienced a 32-degree temperature spike. Then, it disappeared without a trace. I crossed my arms, still unconvinced. So what? It probably just swam off somewhere. Jack chuckled lightly, but the seriousness in his eyes remained. The tag washed up on shore, but there were no signs of the shark. The researchers guessed that a larger creature had come from beneath the shark and dragged it away. Now the question is, what kind of animal could have taken and killed a 9-foot shark? I shrugged, trying to brush it off. A bigger fish. Jack's laugh was tinged with amusement. Yeah, good call. They thought it was a larger great white or maybe an orca. While there was no conclusive proof, that theory was enough to satisfy most in the scientific community. But then Jack's voice dropped, and he leaned in closer, his expression serious. But there's more to this story that wasn't made public. I sighed deeply, but didn't interrupt as Jack continued. You see, that 9-footer wasn't the only tagged sea creature that ended up dead. In total, 4 great whites were killed in that region over a few months. The largest was a 16-foot male. 2 fully grown orcas were also found dead. In some cases, they never recovered the trackers, but the data showed something eerie. I felt a chill run down my spine as Jack paused, his eyes fixed on mine. These animals all died the same way. In all 6 instances, these creatures were dragged down into the abyss by something lurking below. My eyes widened as the realization hit me. But surely this couldn't be possible, right? Even if these animals had met their end, there had to be a reasonable explanation. What we decided to do was set up a kind of trap. We got our hands on the carcass of a freshly deceased 12-foot great white shark and anchored it to a buoy positioned 15 meters beneath the water's surface, right in the middle of the predator's hunting territory. To make sure we captured every detail, we attached underwater cameras to keep a watchful eye and, with luck, get a glimpse of the elusive beast. My pulse quickened as I urged Jack for more details. What happened next? I asked, my voice thick with anticipation. Jack flashed a knowing smile, clearly enjoying the suspense. The shark's body drifted in the water for 3 days, he began. We were just about to cut it loose and give up. And then this happened. He grabbed his phone and connected it to the TV, streaming another clip. This one was brief, barely 10 seconds long. It happened so fast. At first, we were looking at the underwater camera directed straight down into the depths of the ocean. Then, from the darkness, something massive shot upward, heading straight for the camera. I caught only a fleeting glimpse of the creature, but what I saw was unmistakably monstrous. The creature that emerged from the shadows had 3 heads, each pair of eyes glowing an ominous red, and its mouths were gaping, filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. I recoiled in my seat, a startled cry escaping my lips as my mind struggled to comprehend what I had just witnessed. A second later, the video cut to black. No doubt the camera was devoured by the beast. Even though the footage was so brief, Jack managed to show me a still image. The water was murky, and the picture was blurry, but there it was, the horrifying predator with 3 heads and 6 glowing eyes, its jaws wide open like hellish gateways. The image sent chills through my spine, those 6 eyes burning with fury, radiating an intelligence that sent a wave of dread through me. I had never seen such a creature before, but I couldn't deny the striking similarity to the images I had seen in the submerged city. I left Jack's place shortly after, dazed and unsettled, my stomach churning. I didn't set up another meeting, but muttered something about being in touch as I made my way out the door. Jack made it clear that he still had more to share, but I think he knew I needed time to process everything he had shown me. I'll admit that when I got home, I poured myself a strong drink and took a while to calm my nerves. But once I regained my composure, logic began to resurface, and the doubts crept back in. The footage I had watched at Jack's place was deeply unsettling, yet far from definitive. The videos showcasing the submerged city and the terrifying 3-headed creature could easily have been fabricated, created with CGI, or even generated by AI. Who knows? I couldn't fathom why Jack or anyone else would go through such elaborate efforts to create something like this, but I couldn't completely rule out that possibility either. If Jack was telling the truth, there had to be tangible evidence to back it up. Logbooks, data, eyewitness accounts, something that could confirm the story. Perhaps Jack had access to this kind of information, but for the moment, I couldn't bring myself to accept anything as fact. I kept telling myself it all had to be a hoax, a scheme, and that I was being manipulated by Jack Brady. All of my professional instincts screamed at me to walk away, sever ties with Jack, and drop the investigation completely. Yet something deeper within me held me back from doing that. It wasn't just a hunch that I might be chasing an important story, though that played a part. What I had uncovered had stirred something inside me. Call it a deep-rooted fear or an ancient instinct, but I was beginning to think Jack might actually be right, that something horrific and unimaginable lurked in the ocean's darkest corners. And then the nightmares started. In the nights after our 3rd meeting, sleep didn't come easily. But when I did finally manage to drift off, I was tortured by vivid and horrifying dreams. In the first nightmare, I found myself sinking into the abyss, helpless as I descended into the blackness, heading toward an unfathomable pit. The light from above slowly faded, and the water filled my lungs, but in my dreams, I wasn't drowning. Strangely, I felt an eerie sense of calm. It was terrifying, though, to be utterly powerless, to be engulfed by the endless water as I sank deeper and deeper into the abyss. But there was something almost mesmerizing about those depths, an awe-inspiring beauty that filled me as I gazed at the wonders of the natural world below. Yet, the peace in my dream didn't last long. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, something massive, and I turned my head in shock, only to see the creature charging toward me. I tried to scream, but the words caught in my throat, and I kicked with everything I had. But I couldn't escape. The blood in my veins froze as the water around me grew hotter, and then there it was, the nightmare made flesh. It was Leviathan, the monstrous terror of the deep, coming to tear me apart and take my soul. I screamed and fought with all my strength, but it was futile. The creature's 3 ravenous mouths fought each other for the privilege of devouring me whole. and I had the typical reaction to a nightmare, waking up with a scream, drenched in sweat. That one was pretty intense, but I could trace its origins. I had seen images of Leviathan during my last meeting with Jack, and they had terrified me, so it only made sense that my mind would conjure such a nightmare. But the horrors that plagued me the next night were much harder to explain. Once again, I found myself trapped in a nightmarish underwater world, this time at the very depths of the ocean. I couldn't even guess how far down I was, but when I looked upwards, the surface was invisible to me. The only illumination in this submerged nightmare came from bioluminescent sea creatures and plants scattered across the ocean floor. Darkness enveloped me, and I was chilled to the core by the icy waters. I didn't belong here. This was no place for mere mortals. In a panic, I tried to swim upward, but no matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't move. I looked down in horror and realized my feet were trapped in solid concrete, just like the ghoul Jack had encountered in the Bahamas years ago. I fought desperately to free myself, but all my efforts were in vain. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and the horrifying realization set in. I was trapped in this watery prison, and escape seemed impossible. But the nightmare wasn't finished with me yet. Without warning, the temperature of the water around me began to rise rapidly, from freezing to nearly boiling in just seconds. Then, the surrounding water turned an ominous crimson, and a thick red cloud enveloped me. I choked as a noxious substance invaded my lungs, and I quickly realized that whatever had tainted the ocean was pure poison. I prayed for the nightmare to end, but it wasn't done with me. As the red mist parted, I saw something emerging from it, a creature that moved slowly across the ocean floor. My body went stiff with terror as I watched this shadowy being advance towards me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My lungs were filled with seawater, but I couldn't drown. That would have been a merciful end compared to what was coming. It's hard to put into words the monstrosity that emerged from the mist. It resembled a man in form, but I knew deep down it wasn't human. It moved with ease across the seabed, as if it were meant to be there, unaffected by the crushing pressure or the current. I couldn't see its face, if it even had one. All I saw was a dark silhouette moving in my direction, a shadow that seemed to command the entire environment, focused solely on me, an unwelcome presence in its domain. As it neared, I finally saw its eyes. They were glowing, fiery orbs cutting through the darkness, and instead of illuminating the surroundings, they filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. I struggled again against the concrete that held me in place, but my cries were drowned by the rushing water, and the monstrous entity continued its approach, its eyes burning with malicious intent as the darkness it carried engulfed everything around me. That was when I jolted awake, screaming, drenched in sweat. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I didn't hesitate. As soon as the first light of day broke, I called Jack and arranged to meet him later that same afternoon. Whether for better or worse, I had to hear the ending of his story. My voice was trembling when I dialed Jack's number, and I could sense he noticed my unease through the phone. On this occasion, I invited him to come to my place. Normally, I'd never do this with any source, but I reasoned that it would be safer to have him at my home, where I could ensure no funny business when he presented his evidence. But the truth was, I felt uneasy, and leaving my apartment, wasn't something I could bring myself to do. It seems irrational when I think back on it. Over the course of my career, I've faced danger and hardship, but those recent haunting nightmares had shaken me more than I expected. Jack showed up at my door early, just after 9 a.m., as I remember. I tried to pull myself together, but there was no hiding the exhaustion under my eyes and the cold sweat that clung to my skin. Jack, on the other hand, looked unchanged, with his tough facade barely covering the melancholy and vulnerability that lingered just beneath the surface. When he saw me, Jack gave me a look full of suspicion, but didn't say a word as I invited him in. It wasn't until he was comfortably seated in my living room that he spoke, and what he said felt more like a statement than a question. "You've been having nightmares, haven't you?" My jaw dropped as I stared into Jack's unreadable eyes. For a moment, I froze, a tense silence hanging in the air before I finally found my voice. "How the hell did you know that?" Jack gave a small nod, his eyes lowering as if burdened with guilt. "I'm sorry, pal. I should have warned you that this could happen," he said. "Everyone in the OSIU has gone through them. I thought you wouldn't be affected since you're only hearing these accounts secondhand. Guess I was wrong." I let out a long, deep breath, sinking back into the couch, trying to absorb what I had just heard. It didn't make sense. How could the things Jack had shared with me affect my dreams so intensely? Surely it must be some sort of coincidence. But despite the confusion, I knew it was my job to seek out uncomfortable truths, no matter how unsettling. And yet, why was I so frustrated with Jack for dragging me into this? I tried to push my emotions aside, steeling myself to remain professional. "Can I get you a cup of coffee?" I asked, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. Jack flashed a crooked grin and winked, pulling a small bottle of whiskey from his jacket pocket. "I thought we might need something stronger." I raised an eyebrow and glanced at my watch, bemused. "Isn't it a bit early for that?" I asked, my tone taking on an almost self-righteous edge. "Trust me," he said, "you'll want something stronger by the time we're done here. Now, I suggest you grab us 2 glasses. Reluctantly, I got up from the couch and shuffled over to the kitchen. At first, I grabbed just 1 shot glass from the cabinet, but then I hesitated and decided to take a second one. I placed both glasses on the coffee table next to Jack's bottle. By now, my patience had worn thin, and I was eager for answers from my guest. "So, what have you got for me, old man?" I asked, my voice firm. Jack gave a small, approving smile, perhaps recognizing my no-nonsense approach. "Well, my friend, you've done your homework, so I'm sure you're familiar with the bloop." I paused, trying to recall where I had heard the strange term. "Yes, I think I know it," I eventually responded, my tired mind slowly recalling the details. The bloop was an unexplained underwater noise picked up by NOAA in the late 90s, right? "That's correct," Jack replied. "The sound was recorded in the South Pacific in 1997, using a network of hydrophones designed to monitor seismic activity beneath the sea, among other things. It was a low-frequency, high-amplitude sound. At first, the public theory suggested that the noise might have been caused by a creature, a living entity, one that possessed a core much stronger than any known marine animal on Earth. Officially, the origin of the sound was left unexplained. However, in 2012, The NOAA released a statement suggesting it was consistent with glacial movements likely caused by ice calving. I couldn't help but chuckle nervously, sensing I knew where this conversation was headed. Let me guess. The 2012 explanation was just a cover-up, and there's actually a massive creature lurking out there? Jack didn't share in my amusement. His reply came with a tone of calm certainty. "Maybe," he said. "I can't be sure. It wasn't my case, so I wasn't given the full briefing. That said, it's entirely possible the sound originated from a giant, undisclosed sea creature. We've discovered numerous animals in the deep, many of which have never been revealed, and it's safe to assume there are many more waiting to be discovered." He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle in. "But I'm not here to discuss sea monsters today. Not this time. I'm afraid I have something far worse to tell you. An ancient, unspeakable evil that we unknowingly brought into the world. And it all began with an unidentified sound beneath the ocean, one that led us to a very dark place. I attempted to lighten the mood, even though my stomach churned with unease. "Sounds like a horror movie," I joked. Jack let out a heavy sigh as though reluctant to continue, but eventually he spoke. 2 years ago, our sound detection system picked up an unknown signal from the South Atlantic, around 300 miles south of the Falkland Islands. Of course, we've encountered strange sounds before, including the infamous bloop. Most of them had natural explanations, underwater avalanches, whale calls, and the like. But this sound was unlike anything we'd encountered before. The initial recording was fuzzy and low quality, but one thing was unmistakable. It was a human voice, specifically a female voice. A chill ran through me as I stared at Jack, my eyes wide with disbelief. How could that be? We had no idea, but the higher-ups demanded we investigate. A listening ship was dispatched to the coordinates where the signal was first detected, and I was part of the team. We set sail from Port Stanley, heading south to the iconic waters, and deployed our hydrophone array. Then we waited. I won't lie, I was skeptical. I figured we'd come back empty-handed. We had barely been on site for a few hours when our sensors detected the signal. It was as clear as day. Jack quickly pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket, his hand shaking slightly. He hesitated for a moment, his finger hovering over the screen, before he tapped it and played the audio file. I leaned in, listening intently as the recording began with the sound of rushing water. After a brief pause, the noise was interrupted by a voice speaking in perfect English. I couldn't describe the voice exactly. It was distinctly female, but its tone was flat, void of emotion. It almost sounded as though she was reading from a script. There was something unnerving about the way she spoke. The voice was strangely familiar, but I couldn't place where I had heard it before. This message is for the beings of the mortal realm, those who dwell above us. We have the answers you seek, the mysteries of your existence. Then came a series of numbers, which Jack confirmed were coordinates, along with a specific date and time. These details I will not disclose publicly. Come to this location and speak these words. X, come to us, and everything will be revealed. Jack immediately stopped the recording, his body trembling, his face drained of color. "I need that drink now," he muttered. Without hesitation, I poured him a generous glass of whiskey, then made one for myself. We took a stiff drink together, and Jack finally steadied himself enough to continue. The message repeated on loop for about an hour, after which our microphones malfunctioned and the signal was lost. But that wasn't the worst part. Within minutes, the water temperature skyrocketed. It went from freezing cold to near boiling, as if something from the depths of hell were rising up. It was impossible, but I swear on everything that it happened. Jack paused for a moment, taking another deep drink. As you can imagine, he continued, this caused a lot of panic among the crew. But fortunately, the temperature dropped just as quickly, and we wasted no time in pulling anchor and getting out of there. Our equipment was shot, but we had the audio recording to bring back to our superiors. I nodded, fascinated by Jack's story. It was insane, but I was hanging on every word. I had so many questions, but one in particular stood out. What did the Latin words mean? I asked. Jack hesitated for a long time, his gaze dropping as he whispered the translation, barely audible. Nothing comes from nothing. My blood for you. I could feel my heart race, each breath more shallow than the last, as I prepared to ask the next question. What happened then? Let me tell you what we should have done. Nothing at all. I insisted that we disregard the message. We were dealing with forces far beyond our understanding, and it was very likely that we were being drawn into a trap. The coordinates given and the message itself pointed directly to the heart of the Challenger Deep. Are you familiar with that area? I asked after a brief pause. It's the deepest part of the ocean floor, located in the Mariana Trench, in the western Pacific. I believe the Trieste was the first submersible to reach those depths in 1960, and didn't James Cameron make a solo descent there? Yes, he did. The Hollywood director descended to the Challenger Deep in the Deep Sea Challenger in 2012. There have been more expeditions since then, though I highly doubt anyone will attempt it again soon. Not after what happened. What exactly happened? Jack finished his drink, poured another, and then began to speak. Andy Smith, the former head of the OSIU, had recruited me. By that point, he was already retired. I won't mention who took over after him, but you could probably figure it out with some research. Let's just say the new boss was an arrogant, ambitious jerk. Like I said, I was against the mission, and I wasn't alone in that. But in every era, there's always one fool who believes they can challenge the gods, who pushes forward without considering the repercussions. This time was no different. His eyes grew angry, tears welling up as he gripped his phone tightly, hands trembling. We had the time, the date, the coordinates, and the instructions, and we followed them to the letter. The submersible used for the mission was called the DSV Voyager. Its design closely resembled the limiting factor, which had made numerous dives to the ocean's deepest point. But the Voyager was specially modified for this operation and placed under OSIU command. The crew consisted of 2 men, Collins and Rodriguez, both seasoned Navy veterans with decades of experience piloting submersibles. These were highly trained professionals, capable of handling any scenario that might arise, but even they couldn't have been ready for the nightmare we led them into. They were sent in like lambs to the slaughter. Jack paused for a moment, sighing heavily as he stared down at its glass. I'm going to play you the final communication from the Voyager's crew on the day of the mission. I have to warn you, it's not something easy to hear. I prepared myself, unsure of what was to come, but knowing it couldn't possibly be good. The radio transmission I heard was between the Voyager and their headquarters on the surface, reminiscent of the conversations astronauts have with mission control back on Earth. We've got a situation. This wasn't a message from space, but the crew found themselves in a world equally strange and deadly. Despite that, the divers kept their composure and professionalism while giving their initial reports. We've landed. Greetings from the world's lowest point, gentlemen. 10,920 meters beneath the ocean surface. Copy that, Voyager. Please begin status transmission. We've made a successful landing on the sea floor at the exact coordinates given. The pressure capsule remains sealed. Environmental conditions are stable. We await your signal, Commander. Understood. There was a long silence before the next communication, likely due to discussions among the surface team. Eventually, the command center issued its instructions. Affirmative, Voyager. Permission to proceed is granted. Begin the broadcast. Acknowledged, sir. Moments later, those chilling Latin phrases echoed from the speakers, distorted by the crushing pressure, but still recognizable. The voice repeated in a continuous loop, projecting into the vast, pitch-black abyss of Earth's deepest ocean. I sat stunned, unable to comprehend how anyone could authorize such a dangerous operation. I glanced toward Jack, who stared back with a grim intensity. I kept listening as chaos erupted within the recording. A deep rumble began, growing steadily louder and more violent. Command, we're detecting major tremors down here. Say again, Voyager, responded the puzzled surface team. Then a terrified voice broke in from the vessel. Oh my God, the ocean floor is breaking apart. Remain calm, Voyager. Initiate emergency procedures. The outside temperature is climbing fast. The water, it's turning crimson. Dear Lord, what is this? Voyager, report what you're witnessing. Do you read? They're everywhere. They're coming straight at us. What do you mean, Voyager? What's down there? They're not people. They resemble humans, but they're something else. These monsters, these fiends, they move in shadows, those eyes. God, those damn eyes. They see it all. Get a grip, Collins. Hold it together. It's over. They've taken us. There's no stopping it now. Rodriguez, he's gone. The oxygen's depleting. The pressure's off the charts. Dear God. Then came several moments of shrieking terror, followed by utter silence. Only silence crackled back from the deep as the commander shouted hopelessly into the void. Then, without warning, Jack stopped the recording, cutting it off and leaving me frozen, trying to comprehend everything I'd just heard. My mind raced with fear and confusion, but one horrifying image stood out above all. Those dark, humanoid figures with glowing eyes. The divers had allegedly been attacked by these beings in the ocean's deepest trench. But I already knew them. These nightmares had invaded my sleep just the night before. It took me a long moment before I could gather myself enough to speak. What exactly happened down there, Jack? He gave a slow shrug, answering with a grim truth. No one knows. The most logical theory is a catastrophic hull failure caused by the crushing pressure at that depth. The crew might have suffered hallucinations from lack of oxygen. After such a disaster, barely anything would remain. Still, we deployed a remote-operated vehicle to investigate the site, hoping for answers. But there was nothing. No wreckage, no traces of bodies, not even a hint the Voyager ever existed. And officially, it didn't. The mission wasn't recorded anywhere. Collins and Rodriguez were listed as victims of a routine training mishap, and the entire Luckley affair was buried. I nodded slowly as the realization hit me. This was familiar ground. A covert mission gone horribly wrong. Brave men lost because of careless leadership and a cover-up to erase it all. Even without the bizarre parts, that's quite a revelation. True, but sadly, the story doesn't end there. My heart sank at those words. The signal, the entities that slipped through, they won't stop now, will they? We opened a door that day, a timeless evil, sealed away in the abyss for millennia, and now, because of our foolishness, it's loose. Jack exhaled deeply and lowered his voice to a near whisper as he continued. I stepped down not long after what happened at Challenger Deep. It was either that or do something unforgivable to my superior. Even so, I've got contacts in the OSIU who keep me informed. The recent surge in bizarre activity has been overwhelming. People vanishing at sea, strange beings surfacing from the ocean, ghostly voices echoing along shorelines, and shadowy figures appearing on oil platforms and remote islands. There have been so many cases that the agency is drowning. Something terrifying is stirring in our oceans, and it's only the beginning. The remainder of that morning's conversation has faded into a hazy blur in my recollection. I vaguely remember us sharing at least one final drink before Jack departed from my house. Yet, one thing remained crystal clear. His last words as I walked him to the door, his eyes bloodshot and tinged with madness. Be wary of the dreams, my friend. These entities don't just haunt the ocean. They burrow deep into your mind. Then he vanished into the night. That evening proved even more tormenting than the one before. Not even the liquor could lull me into restful sleep. Though the dreams weren't quite as clear this time, they bombarded me with ghastly scenes. Men thrashing in dark waters, sirens luring the innocent to their deaths, and abominable creatures rising from the frozen trenches below. And throughout it all, those sinister, smoky figures returned. Every time I closed my eyes, those searing, fiery eyes stared back at me. It felt as if they peered directly into my core, aware of every hidden sin and weakness, ready to manipulate and devour what made me human. I don't believe I'll ever find peace again, not after the terrors I've witnessed and the truths I've heard. At 5 a.m. the next day, I called Jack. He was already awake. He spoke strangely, but we agreed to meet just after sunrise. He told me it would be the last time, and that he would give me everything I needed to expose the truth. I didn't want to believe him. This story had consumed me, embedded itself in my dreams, and invaded every moment of my waking life. There was no one else who could understand. Jack Brady was the only person who did. I arrived shortly after dawn and sat on a bench overlooking the water, waiting nearly an hour for him. Far off on the horizon, a storm was gathering, ominous clouds and angry waves building with force. At the time, I paid little attention to it. What truly concerned me was Jack's delay, unusual for him. I tried calling, but his phone went straight to voicemail. That's when anxiety crept in. I remembered from before that his beloved yacht, the Nautilus, was docked in the marina. Maybe he was down there working on it. I made my way along the pier, casting nervous glances toward the rising storm. To my astonishment, the Nautilus was missing from its berth. Scanning the marina, I spotted the vessel already moving through the harbor, sails down, engine humming, and there was Jack, standing at the helm, guiding it into the open water. Panic surged through me as I dashed down the dock, yelling his name. I recalled what he'd mentioned during our second encounter, that he hadn't returned to the sea since retiring, nor did he plan to ever do so again. It was possible he'd changed his mind, but something about the situation seemed deeply off. Jack was steering straight toward the approaching storm, ignoring my frantic cries for attention. Instead, his gaze remained locked on the horizon, unwavering and intense, as though caught in a trance or consumed by some internal revelation. I rushed to the furthest end of the dock while the tempest bore down, its fierce winds and pelting rain battering me. I kept shouting until my voice gave out, but Jack never looked back, his vessel charging headlong into the raging storm. I immediately called the Coast Guard, and they launched a search operation as quickly as they could. The squall had been brief but ferocious. Later that day, they found the Nautilus overturned and barely afloat. Jack Brady was nowhere to be found, and not a single trace of him remained. The search lasted 3 full days, but it was eventually abandoned. Officials concluded that Jack had perished at sea. No one could explain why a seasoned sailor would venture out into such dangerous weather without proper safety measures. Some speculated he had taken his own life, but I knew better. It seemed inevitable that the dark force Jack had uncovered had finally claimed him, compelling him into that fatal voyage. Though he was gone, Jack left something behind. Amid the chaos of that day, I didn't check my phone for several hours. When I finally did, I discovered an email from Jack's account. It had no subject, just a single hyperlink. Under normal conditions, I would have dismissed it as spam, but this time I tapped the link, which opened a Dropbox folder. Inside was a virtual archive of truth and evidence. The videos and audio files Jack had shared with me were all there, along with much more. Journals, testimonies, classified intel, and a massive collection of images and documents that surely validated his claims beyond a shadow of doubt. If I had more time, I would thoroughly investigate, verify every piece, chase down leads, and speak with more witnesses. But sadly, I feel that time slipping away, which is why I must resort to typing up this urgent article. Because whatever dark force consumed Jack Brady has now taken root within my own mind. And it's not just my dreams that are poisoned with horror. During the hours of daylight, I feel irresistibly drawn to the sea. I linger at the shoreline for what feels like an eternity, gazing into the vast waters. A powerful compulsion wells up inside me, pulling me closer to the frigid, merciless deep. I'm resisting with every ounce of will I possess, but I fear it's only a matter of time before the sinister entities now ruling our seas claim both my body and spirit. So, I'm making this final plea. It's become painfully obvious that those in power are helpless to stop the malevolence they accidentally set free, and now seem more focused on hiding their role in what's transpired. Even if I can't be saved, I still believe humanity has a fighting chance. I'm telling Jack's tale with the hope that someone listening might stop this darkness from consuming everything. The signs must still exist. The forgotten lore or sacred power that once held these sea-born monsters in check for countless ages. There has to be a solution. This can't be how it ends. Dear God, please deliver us before time runs out.